Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this edition of Leak Project. Now, tonight we have a great opportunity for you to get in on basically the ground floor with a movement that has just taken off like wildfire. There's over 2,000 people right now that have made just an incredible pledge of the possibility that they're willing to get arrested for what they believe in. And that's pretty remarkable when you get to that level. So our guest is Kai Newkirk. Thank you so much for coming on the show with us. And if you'd like to know more about what's going on, folks, check out democracyspring.org, democracyspring.org. Kai, how's it going?
Good, brother. Good to be with you. Thanks so much for having me on.
Absolutely. You know, I noticed today on Google, you guys were on the pretty much front page of a whole bunch of different news articles out there. And I said, I got to get these guys on the show. I went to the website. I read a little bit about what you guys are doing. And I'm going to turn the microphone over to you in just a minute. But for those that don't know what this is, there's just a couple of paragraphs that I want to read off of your website, democracyspring.org, to give people an idea why I decided it was so important to reach out to you. So here it goes. Why this? Why now? Every American deserves an equal voice in government. That is our birthright of freedom, won through generations of struggle. But today, our democracy is in crisis. American elections are dominated by billionaires and big money interests who can spend unlimited sums of money on political campaigns to protect their special interests at the general expense. Meanwhile, as the super rich dominate the money primary that decides who can run for office, almost half of the states in the union have passed new laws that disenfranchise everyday voters, especially people of color and the poor. This corruption violates the core principles of American democracy. One person, one vote, citizen equality. You know, that's a pretty powerful statement that you guys make there on the website. And, you know, I want to find out really why you decided that this is so important that you gathered a whole bunch of people together and you guys are willing to get yourselves arrested for what you believe in.
Well, I think you touched on it there in the introduction. The status quo of the corruption of our democracy, the domination of our elections and government by big money, by billionaires, by corporations, and the simultaneous effort to cut out the participation at the basic level of voting by so many people, especially often the most vulnerable and the folks who are most impacted in the current situation in our society, people of color, the poor, elderly students. This status quo is a violation of our freedom. It's a violation of a basic American value of political equality, of one person, one vote. That's at the core of the promise of democracy in our country. If you don't participate meaningfully in power, then someone else is ruling you, and you are not free. But beyond that, a violation of our freedom and dignity, there are profound consequences and pain that happen in our society, in our lives, for our families and communities, because our government is not responsive to the people as a whole, and is essentially being run by those who, buy our democracy and elections that put it up for sale to the highest bidder. Whether we talk about potentially catastrophic climate change that threatens the future for our species, or historic levels of economic inequality and all the level impacts from that, student debt, stagnating wages, declining middle class, people working 2 and 3 jobs just to get by, education that's chronically underfunded, mass incarceration that puts more people in jail in our country, primarily black and brown, than on any country on earth. All of these problems, all of these urgent injustices, are sustained or deepened and so difficult to end and reform because our government is not responsive to the people, because we have to fight so hard to win reforms, because the money interests that dominate our elections and have power within our government are profiting from that status quo, and they don't want it to change. So if we want to change those things, if we want to live in a country, in a society where there can be well-being and liberty and justice for all, and we can solve these problems and unleash the great potential for a future, then we have to solve this problem. We have to save our democracy. We have to fix this problem first.
So when you decided that you get thousands of people together and you're going to basically do a march and protest, and I want to walk through that in a minute, but do you feel that this is going to have kind of a wildfire to the point where you're going to have sections all over the country and people are going to get together, and especially because it is an elections year, that it's going to make more of an impact?
Well, we sure hope so, right? There is tremendous frustration in the country about the status quo, right? I think we would never see candidates like Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders, who a year ago, if you had said they would be competing seriously for the presidential nomination of their parties, you've been laughed out of the room. But one common thread that runs through their otherwise radically different candidacies is that they're speaking to this corrupt campaign finance system, in the sense that our economy is rigged because of it, and that everyday people, working families, the middle class, are left behind, and that there's elite that's in charge and doesn't care about them. And what we want to do is use this tried and true method of mass nonviolent action, of people being willing to put our bodies and our liberty on the line to take a stand and to disrupt business as usual. We want to use that to try to light a spark, right, that can tap into the potential of all that anger and frustration and turn it into hope, right, and show people that we can take a stand and take this issue from the back of people's minds, where it stays in resignation, and put it on the front pages, put it in all over people's Facebook feeds when they're seeing, wow, people from across the country have come together. They've marched from the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia to DC, and people from all walks of life are bringing this demand for Congress to end this corruption and save our democracy, ensure free and fair elections, and are willing to risk arrest, and day after day giving Congress a choice to either listen to the people and do their job and solve this problem, move the solutions that are on the table that they could act on right now, or send hundreds of people to jail day after day, simply for demanding an equal voice in government. And we think if we can do that, we can create that dramatic crisis, right? That we can force a conversation around this in the middle of this election. We can force members of Congress and candidates to take a stand on the side of the people and democracy, or on the side of big money and corruption. And we can show people around the country that we don't have to accept this plutocracy, that we can stand up and we can force change. And we think that if we do that in the middle of this election, which is going to be, by the way, the most big money dominated, most dark money drenched, voter suppression marred election in modern history in our country, that we can make this election in part a referendum on this issue. And because the people are with us across the board, Republican, Democrat, Independent, people want change on this, we think that's a referendum that we can win, and that the candidates who stand on the right side should do better. But we're going to send a signal that the American people are not going to stand for this anymore.
So if you look at politics, whether they're Republican or Democrat or Independent, my personal beliefs is they're all a bunch of actors up there playing in a stage, essentially. They always, a lot of them they'll say one thing and people get all excited, and then they get put into office and they do the exact opposite time and time and time again. So whether they're genuine at the beginning and they change their mind because they have to, or they get bribed or whatever, I don't know. That's just speculation. I can't prove any of that. But you certainly can go back and prove that many times these people that are going for president, they're in the elections, they're going to say anything that year to get into office, and then there's a change. So with Donald Trump, there's what I call the Trump phenomenon right now. he's certainly entertaining to watch, and I can appreciate wanting to bring jobs back to America and some of the things that he says, and other things he says are definitely far out. And one thing I appreciate about being an American is we all do have the right to say basically what we want to for the most part. They do tend to clamp down on that with social media and other things, but that's for a whole other subject. So what do you feel about Trump and what the media is saying about how he's not taking any money for campaigns and stuff like that? Do you think he really is for the people, or another staged individual that's going to be flip flop if he does make it into office or whatever?
Well, first of all, I think we have to be very clear. This is a systemic problem. It's not about individuals who, have a good conscience or don't, right? It's that the system that we have for funding elections and for running for office means that the primary dependency of a candidate is on a small group of funders that they have to go to get their money, and not the voters first, right? And not everyday people as small donors, right? So we have to change that system of incentives, which means currently that if you want to run for office, the people that you need to be most responsive to, the people that you are relying on the most, is this tiny fraction, the wealthiest 1%. We call it a wealth primary, right? So you have to get through that before you even get to the vote. So we need to change that. No matter who is elected as president, they're going to have to work with a Congress that was elected within this corrupt campaign finance system. And so we need to have a movement that's going to win systemic change, right? That can change the game so that everyone who's running is dependent upon the people as a whole, and it gives us a government that is of, by, and for the people, not just the 1%. So we got to be clear about that, whether that's Trump, Bernie, Clinton, whoever it is. The problem that we're facing is a systemic one, right? It's a systemic corruption of our democracy. It's not about individuals that are good or bad, right? Or one candidate, one situation. No matter who we elect for president, unless we change the system by which people are elected, we're never going to have a democracy that works for everyone. Whether it's Bernie, Trump, Clinton, it doesn't matter. It's not enough. That's not enough, right? Because right now, if you're going to run for office, right, you have to raise money from this tiny slice of the wealthiest 1%. That's who you're primarily dependent upon. It's a wealth primary that you have to compete in first. It's a 1% primary before the voters get our say. And we as everyday voters, as potential small donors, as citizen funders of elections, don't have a vote because it takes a lot of money to vote in that wealth primary, right? So until we change that systemic problem and have a citizen-funded, a publicly funded election in which people are accountable to small donors, just as we are to voters, and with the principle of political equality and equal power to participate, we're not going to have a government that represents us all. So what we need is a champion in the White House who's going to fight for that, but we need to have a movement that's going to drive that and force them to move forward, and force candidates for Congress to step up and do the right thing as well. Trump, he said some good things, right? He said, he's acknowledged that he participated in this corrupt system as a big donor, right? He's like, I used to buy these people off, right? But I can't be bought as a billionaire. And that speaks to the hunger that people have for someone who can't be bought. But we need to have a hunger for a system, okay, in which you don't have to be bought to run, right? And the thing is like, what Trump is saying in terms of solution is that, instead of having candidates who are bought by billionaires elect a billionaire themselves, but either way, it's still billionaires that are running the show, not everyday people. That's not democracy. That's a plutocracy, right? And he's not pushing forward any reforms that would actually change the situation, right? So it's this idea of somehow relying on this one individual that can stand outside of a corrupt system, but that's not good enough, and he's not talking about reforms. And we have to be very clear. This is a nonpartisan campaign, Democracy Spring is, but not an amoral campaign. And from a moral perspective, we have to draw the line that Trump and a lot of the things that he has said have crossed into the realm of fascism and are completely unacceptable within American politics. When someone in your own party, like Jim Gilmore, former governor of Virginia, says that what Trump has been calling for is fascist talk, that's a sign that someone has gone beyond the pale. And so even though we're a nonpartisan campaign, we have to draw the line. And what Trump is doing is unacceptable. Conservatives, Republicans need to call that out as well. But we reach out to Trump supporters and say, look, you're right. The political system is corrupt. The economy is rigged, right? There are elites that are running things without regard to the impact on the middle class and working families and people that are being left behind. We do need to change that, but we need a movement of hope that brings people together to do that and changes the system so we have a democracy in which everyone running for office has to represent the people and gives us a government that will deal with our problems. That's the solution, right?
You
And
know,
that's what we're building here in Democracy Spring.
and also, I'm thinking back when the Occupy Wall Street movement was taking place. And I think that there was a lot
Hmm.
of people that had genuinely good intentions, but it never really seemed to find that focus. There's so many different ideas, and I talked to many people that were a part of it, and they just kind of seemed far out, and they just kind of seemed like they were doing it because they wanted to be a part of the motions. They could have been protesting, the a redheaded unicorn not being able to go over a rainbow or something, and just because of the, I'm being sarcastic there, but they just didn't really seem to care. Obviously, they were just kind of going through the motions. So, what do you think about the Occupy Wall Street movement?
Well, I think, I participated in the Occupy movement in LA. Occupy Wall Street changed the world. It changed the narrative. It shifted the whole political weather in our country. The fight against economic inequality will never be the same. You wouldn't have Bernie Sanders. You wouldn't have Fight for 15. You wouldn't have these living wage increases and millionaire taxes that have happened across the country unless we had shifted the weather and created a conversation that focused on that, where people had to take sides. And that was because of the sacrifice that people made in Occupy Wall Street, and that they were willing to disrupt business as usual to do that. So we carried that spirit on. Are there lessons that we can learn from some of the challenges and struggles there? Absolutely. Um, People would always say, well, what's your demand? And I think people were raising a lot of grievances of all the different ways that the 99% were getting screwed, right? And so one thing I think that we are very clear about in Democracy Spring is that we have many grievances. We have many reasons why we need to be in this fight. And we're very clear about what the demand is and the change that we're seeking to address those, which is to force Congress to take immediate action to end this corruption of big money in politics and ensure free and fair elections that give us all an equal voice. Because if we have that, we'll be able to elect a government that's truly of by and for the people, that represents us all, and will be responsive to our needs and a tool to solve those problems. And we know that we have to build a movement that's going to fight in that direction, that's going to use mass nonviolent action. And I think that this moment is one of tremendous opportunity. It's one of crisis and one of opportunity. There's a need, but I think that we can tap into something in our country. There's almost 3,000 people that have pledged to risk arrest, over 100 organizations that are part of this, public figures like Mark Ruffalo and Gabby Hoffman, Lawrence Lessig, Cenk Uygur, Ben Cohen, Umi Sela, Francis Moore Lepay, that have pledged to risk arrest, along with so many others, and that are going to take a stand in the middle of this election in a way that I think can light a spark and start a fire that mobilizes people around the country and forces a conversation and shifts the weather, just like Occupy did, in a way where that we can focus all of that on this demand, and reshape this election, right? And make everyone, candidates have to take a side and make it a referendum on where people stand. And I think that's one that we can win and create a mandate for reform. And we have to be clear that this is the beginning, and that whatever happens when we come together in DC, April 11th, we arrive and we begin this mass sit-in, and it will continue day after day until either Congress acts or they send so many of us to jail that it's the largest civil disobedience of this century. We're going to send a message that no one can ignore. And we're going to make the change of the landscape of the fight for political equality and impact this election and build a movement that can fight to enforce a mandate for reform after the election. And we're going to continue to build, continue to organize, and continue to escalate and show that we're going to shut things down and disrupt the status of business as usual in our country until we see change. And that's the history of progress in our country. And we stand within that and continue it today. So we reach out to people. If you agree with us on this issue, go to democracyspring.org, sign up, get off the sidelines, be a part of history. We're going to win some change here.
I certainly appreciate your passion. And wow, if this can really get into fruition and you guys get the media to take play, so that would be what would really take it over the top. Because I've often said before, there's 6 corporations that control over 90% of the brain drain mainstream news. So if you can get outlets like CNN, Fox, MSNBC to start promoting this movement, because it does take ratings. So if they can see that people are going to watch that and they can still sell their commercials, well, then you guys can get on there too and then kind of get into the public light as well. And it's interesting how there's always a spin and a different side of things, because if we go back to the Occupy Wall Street movement here for a moment, just again as a reference point, I'm sure you read the articles about how George Soros was funding that. And then the next day, an article comes out, says he wasn't. And whether he did or didn't, obviously the media can spin that and say, well, if you guys are really trying to get away from the system, then how come you're letting the Borg itself assimilate you and fund you?
Well, Mom always said you can't believe everything you read on the internet. George Soros hasn't given us a dime. This campaign has been funded by many small donors who come together, working people and everyday folks come together through many of the different organizations that are part of it that have put in money and it enabled us to do this. So I think we've got to focus on that. All this talk about George Soros, and what he funds and what he doesn't, I think takes away from the fact that, anytime there's a movement, that's you can't buy a movement. You can't pay for a movement. It's only going to happen if people in their hearts and in their minds have said, we're fed up with the status quo. We're willing to work and volunteer and fight and struggle to change things, right? That's how progress has happened in our country through the movements of the past that ended slavery, that won the right to vote for women, that won the basic protections of workers and the right to organize, that ended Jim Crow segregation. In the South, that have won progress on immigrant rights, on the environment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, across the board. It's been everyday people that came together, that organized, and that came to a point where they were willing to step up, put their bodies and liberty on the line, and disrupt business as usual, and nonviolent direct action, and prevent the status quo from being able to move forward without addressing their concerns. Right? Started a conversation that could no longer be ignored. That's what we're going to do this April in D.C. in Democracy Spring. Is we're going to send a message that no one can ignore. When more people come together than have on any other issue in our country this century, and are willing to make the sacrifice of risking arrest at the nation's capital, right, day after day, and the eyes of the nation and the world upon us as people make this sacrifice and try to reclaim the people's house, we're gonna send a message that the American people are not going to stand for this anymore, that we don't have to, and that change is coming. That after this long winter of corruption of our democracy in our country, that spring is coming for democracy in America.
And I'm going back to last year when I had the opportunity to visit Washington, D.C. And it was the first time I had been out there. I absolutely loved it. It made you feel so patriotic just being there. The buildings, the people, the energy, it was just electric. And I really appreciated the opportunity to go out there. And one thing that I noticed when I was there was this gal that was probably 110 years old, a protester across the street from the White House. And I can't remember her name. I'm going to have to look it up. But she was the longest protester of all time. She was at that one location for decades, literally, protesting the wars in the Middle East. Seemed like a sweet old lady, But anyway, so are you guys, when you go out there, are you going to basically set it up to where you're all standing around certain buildings? Walk us through the event, if you would, and why do people need to get arrested? What's going to get to that point, if that does happen, please?
Yeah, well, first of all, I can't remember the name of the woman that you were referring to, but I believe she died recently.
She did, yeah.
So, we honor that sacrifice and that commitment. It's profound. We've got to have that in the movement. We've also got to think, strategically and carefully about how we can be effective by bringing more and more people together. But we honor that legacy and that spirit there. What's going to happen in this case, right, is we're going to start off April 2nd. We're going to meet in Philadelphia at the Liberty Bells, this location that's symbolic of our aspirations to democracy as a country. We're going to rally there and issue our demand to Congress to take immediate action to end this corruption and ensure free and fair elections that give us all an equal voice. There's 4 different bills that are on the table now that would be substantial steps forward on money in politics, to shift away from big money domination to small donors and public citizen funding, and those that would protect the right to vote and enable people to participate and vote more. That Congress could move right now, and they're not doing so. There's a fifth step that they could take now with the vacancy on the Supreme Court, which would be to confirm a nominee who's going to uphold our right to a one-person, one-vote democracy that gives us all an equal voice. And we're going to make it clear that if we arrive in D.C. after this 10-day, 140-mile march down through Delaware and Maryland and into the nation's capital, and Congress has still refused to do anything to listen to the people and do their job, that we will have no choice but to nonviolently reclaim the People's House in a mass nonviolent sit-in. And so we'll rally in Washington, D.C. at Union Station on the 11th that morning, and then we will march to the People's House and go as close as we can, as far as we can, to claiming that space inside the Capitol and on the grounds to say, we are not going to allow this corruption to continue. We are going to put our bodies here and say, Congress, you need to listen, you need to change this, or you need to send us all to jail. And we will hold this space and come back day after day until they have taken action or sent so many of us to jail that it will be the largest civil disobedience of this century and send a message that no one can ignore. The American people are going to take our democracy back. And so for those who are thinking about joining us, if you've never risked arrest before, it's a profoundly empowering experience to put your values first above any convenience and to say, I'm willing to place myself in the way of what's wrong and stand up for what's right. And if that means I have to go to jail, I'm willing to do that. That inspires people. And when we have hundreds of people do that, and ultimately over 1,000 or 2,000, it's going to focus the attention of the nation on this issue and this crisis like never before, right in the middle of an election, and make this election a question, a referendum. Are we going to be a democracy, or are we going to be a plutocracy? Are we going to have a government of, by, and for the people, or a government of the 1%? And I think if we create that conversation, we're going to force change, because almost everyone in our country, across the board, the political spectrum, wants a one-person, one-vote system. They want to have an equal voice. And if we raise this conversation and force this question, we're going to mobilize people around it and activate people around it in a way that will ultimately force the status quo to change.
Well, here at the Leak Project, we've got a platform where we're reaching tens of thousands of people a day. And if you guys are out there and you would like to send us streaming footage to help protect your interests and also get this out there, I would be more than happy to set up a live stream link, and you guys could give us updates, and we could actually tap in at any time to see how you're doing. If you have some type of GoPro setup or action cams or
Yes,
cell phones.
Done deal. Done deal, brother. Let's make it happen.
Beautiful.
We're going to make this story so big that no one can ignore it, right? And so, for folks that are seeing this, this might seem like a step that you haven't contemplated taking before, but look, it's a step that you need to take, that we need people to step up. This is a time, this is an opportunity. If we don't win change on this, a lot of people are going to continue to suffer in our country. But there is hope if we do this. We can bring people together around this issue. So many people agree. And if we have control of the resources of this country, if we can sit down at the table of government as a nation where all of our needs and voices are heard, there's potential for a bright and beautiful future in our country if we can marshal the resources that we have for the good of all in our country. And that's only going to be possible if we win a democracy in which all of our voices and needs count, because we're all equally empowered to decide who sits down at the table in Congress to make these decisions, cast these votes, and pass these bills. So this is an incredible opportunity. It's an incredible moment for us. If you go to Democracy Spring and sign up, you'll get a phone call. Somebody will reach out to you, explain what's happening and how you can participate. And we're going to come together and change the course of history. And your live stream that can be a part of sharing that story and making sure it reaches millions and millions of people.
I think that's important because the mainstream might not touch this. And, there's going to be little clips on Breitbart and stuff like that. You're definitely going to have some articles. But if the mainstream doesn't want something out there, then they just don't report on it.
Well, I would challenge you on that, my brother, because, think about Occupy, right? Did the mainstream media want to cover Occupy Wall Street? No, they did. But once they stuck around, right, and they forced the issue, right, and they created this kind of drama about how long people were going to be there, and they stuck it out, and hundreds of people arrested crossing the Brooklyn Bridge, right? And they built a story in terms of the reality of what was happening that was being paid attention to on social media and building there, and some media coverage happening. We create a situation where those the big media corporations, right, have to start covering because they have to protect their credibility, right? If there's a huge story and they refuse to cover it, something that's building, then they lose their credibility. CNN, what do they say? The most trusted name in news, right? That brand of being trusted and seen as credible is tremendously valuable to them. So even right now, so when we build something and organize and through social media, which we can control, create a story that's significant to people, at a certain point, they have to start covering it, and we can break and get cracks into it within the progressive media, or like Breitbart, blew it up, with this kind of freak out story, this anti-Trump, largest civil disobedience in the country, of the century, chaos in Washington, right?
But you guys aren't really anti-Trump. You guys are just
No,
anti,
it's
not
pro-democracy.
liberty.
It's pro-democracy. We draw a clear line in terms of what Trump has been saying, like I said earlier. But this is bigger than any candidate. It's bigger than any one election. It's about the corruption of our democracy and whether we're going to have a government that represents all people and not just the 1%. It's about the sacred and fundamental right to vote and the right to an equal voice in government. That's the promise of democracy. That's bigger than any candidate, and that's what we're fighting for. That's the crucial question for our country right now. And so I'm confident already, we're getting interest is building and growing even from mainstream press now, because I think something historic is going to happen. And we are proclaiming that. And it's true because people are coming together and stepping up and organizing. And that's going to happen. And people can be a part of that. And it's going to continue to build, right? This is a moment of crisis and tremendous opportunity. And I believe we're going to do something here that's going to change the political weather in this country and make it possible to win fundamental reforms that will save our democracy and give us a government through which we can solve the urgent problems that we face as a country. So I think that we're going to be able to get substantial media coverage. It's going to start building on social media and then getting individual outlets to start covering it, like we've seen, from The Hill and from Tom Hartman and Yes Magazine, CNN. We've got something scheduled there. I was in Fox Business in the green room about to go on live this morning. They canceled it because of a bunch of other stuff happening, but it's building, it's growing. I'm confident that with your help and the support of your listeners and viewers, that we're going to be able to turn this into a moment that no one can ignore. We're very confident about that.
And let me jump in too, because my mind's going about 1 trillion miles an hour right now. I remember when Occupy.
Fast.
Yeah, thank you. So you look at the Occupy Wall Street, and I was thinking the whole time, let's have an Occupy Monsanto. And I think there were some people out there that started something like that. There was a Facebook page or something. But could you imagine as many people that were involved with that Occupy Wall Street, or even just a quarter, a sliver of that amount of people went and occupied Monsanto and said, we're not going to allow you guys to spray these harsh chemicals on foods that are given to us and our families that cause all sorts of ailments, and mice that have been fed this stuff that get these giant tumors, etc. We're not going to allow you to put these just insane ingredients into vaccines that are made in China because they're cheaper over there, and then force feed them into babies. And just certain things that, you should have the right to decide whether you believe in vaccines or not. You should have the right to decide if that's what you want to do. You should have the opportunity to see what's in that vaccine that they give your child. So, in my opinion, but so are you guys going to get into reform like that? Or if this really does take off and blast off, are you going to go after the guys that are poisoning the food supply and the water supply, the big financiers, the political people behind the scenes?
Well, look, I mean, Occupy Monsanto, that'd be great. But I think, what we've got to focus on, right, is what's the strategic linchpin, to change in our country. That there are people in the food justice movement, right, that are part of Democracy Spring. There are people in the movement for Black Lives and the immigrant rights movement and the climate justice movement, in the labor movement, right? Young libertarians that have their own reasons to get involved, right? People are coming together because they see that winning any real change in our country that is tremendously blocked and made so much more difficult because of the status quo of this corruption. And that until we change that, it's going to be so much harder to win progress on any of these other fights, right? So whichever place you're coming to, whether you're trying to deal with the problems that Monsanto creates or Walmart or Wall Street banks or private prison companies, we've got to win a government that is no longer captured by those interests and instead responsible to the people and dependent upon the people as a whole as equal citizens, right? If we do that, then we'll have the power to create regulations and laws and change policies that meet the needs of people, right? Instead of those corporations, instead of moneyed interests, right? It's going to be about what's good for our nation as a whole, not for this wealthy elite 1%. So that's why this campaign is so important. That's why we need to prioritize it within other fights, because it can open up the possibilities for change on so many other fronts.
Hey, that's a great way to put it. Stay super focused and dialed in. Be like Blitzer King, just put all your forces and
That's
efforts
right.
into that one thing instead of spreading out. And like Occupy Wall Street, as successful as it was, this could be the 2.0 version. And, the things that you did wrong previously, you can take that into account and make them right this time. So
That's what we're trying to do.
yeah.
We continue to learn from movements of the past, and this is an opportunity, this moment, for us to move forward and win change that can make it possible to make progress on so many critical fronts.
Now, also, I'm thinking of some type of food supply, water supply. You're going to need local networks to get you access to things if you're planning on staying there for long periods of time. How long do you think some of you are going to be able to stay at one place before they haul you off in black Suburbans?
Well, I don't know about
Hopefully
black
not.
Suburbans. I think what we're likely to see is paddy wagons, buses, that sort of thing, when folks are arrested. But I think it's likely that people will be arrested every day at the Capitol. I don't think they're going to let us hold the space and occupy on the grounds and sit in and just maintain it indefinitely each day, inside or outside. I think they will move to arrest, but then people will come back the next day, right? And it will continue at least from April 11th, that Monday, through April 18th, the following Monday, at least for a week, and then we'll see where we're at. Whether we are going to continue, or whether we're going to claim victory and celebrate the fact that we've sent a message that no one can ignore in this country, and that through the largest civil disobedience of this century, we've staked a flag that says the American people are not going to accept the status quo of corruption and political inequality anymore. We want a democracy that works for us all, a government that represents us all. And when we've created that conversation and forced people to take a stand and take a side, then we'll have shifted the political weather in this country and opened the door to reforms right in the middle of this election. We can make it a referendum on whether we're going to have change or not, and I think that's a referendum that the people will win. We'll assess it day to day how long we're going to continue it. But the good thing is that we know that whatever happens, whether Congress comes to their senses and there's a miracle and they say, you know what, we're going to listen to the people and do the right thing because we've shocked, business as usual so profoundly, or they send us all to jail in the largest civil disobedience of the century, that there's a victory, right, and that we will have focused the attention of our nation on this critical issue in a way that's never happened before, and created a conversation where we're going to reckon with this, that's framed by the people standing up and demanding an equal voice. And once we do that, we're going to set us on a path to change on this issue. Very confident about that. This is the game changer. This is the moment where we turn the tide. And this is the opportunity for your listeners and your viewers to get off the sidelines and be part of history, be part of a movement that's going to win change, that's going to make a difference for you, the people that you love, the places you love, the principles that matter most to you. All of them are at risk if we don't save our democracy. And all of them can flourish and thrive if we do. So this is our moment. Be part of this democracy spring.
I often tell people, Kai, that we have an opportunity in life now to create a new renaissance with all the facilities and abilities and inventors and opportunities and connection networks. I mean, pretty much everybody has a chance to do something great nowadays. It's not like we have to go out and pillage for food and make fire with rocks and sticks. I mean, most of us have decent lives. Even people that might be considered, even at poverty levels, they're not living in caves somewhere where it's 20 below and they have to have animal furs unless they're homesteading in Alaska. And good for them. I'm sure they're living very comfortable lives. I might like to do that sometime. I get sick of the city at times, but. You brought up secret prisons earlier, and the network where there's more people per capita in America locked up than anywhere else in the world, and the amount of money that gets
private prisons. I was talking about.
No, you did say private prisons. I actually made the mistake there by saying secret prisons because that's the next question I'm going to ask you. It's going to segue to that, so that's my fault. But the prison system makes just so much money. And the Occupy Wall Street movement, there was, because of that movement, I'm sure you read about the laws that were passed after that towards certain protesters, where if you block a federal building or certain services, then it could be considered a felony. And if you read it, it basically made it sound like if you're protesting on a sidewalk and somebody that works for the federal government's trying to get into the building or get out to lunch or something like that, and they make it back to work a couple minutes late, that they could blame it on you, and you're essentially going to have the possibility of having a felony on your record. So do you ever have the possible concern that there could be new laws passed because of this that could make it even more strict to protest, and the possibility of there being secret type prisons where hey, maybe they're going to hang you there and say you're considered a domestic terrorist. And then basically because of the NDAA Act and the Patriot Act and all of these totalitarian draconian bills that have been passed, that they don't have to give you a lawyer or the right to make a phone call.
That's not something that concerns me greatly in terms of what we're doing here, because this is what we're building is a mass nonviolent movement which thrives on transparency, on openness, on claiming and defending the moral high ground, right? We have nothing to hide. And when we fight out in the light of day, right, in the public, and we draw attention to what we're doing, then we make it very difficult, for there to be that kind of repression, because there are costs to that when it happens in the public eye, right? So, I'm not concerned, and I don't think people who are going to participate in this campaign, should be concerned about that. This is something where we expect that, the police will make arrests, that people will get out either that day or at the latest the next day, that the legal consequences will be very minimal. It's a nonviolent movement. We're going to maintain the moral high ground. We're going to focus the public attention and the media on it, and we're going to force this conversation. And when we do that, when we play to our strengths as everyday people, right, then we have power in a situation, even in the case of these shifts away and these violations of civil liberties and this shift towards a security state in our country, which is something that we have to deal with. It's a serious problem. And we need to win on this fight, because that's another issue where there are the moneyed interests that are profiting from the status quo within the defense and intelligence industry, right, that don't want to see change. They don't want to see a democratic government that's responsive to the people, that can rein that stuff in and say, no, this mass surveillance is not going to continue, et cetera, right? No, there are not going to be laws that violate the Constitution that say that, people can be arrested in these situations without due process.
Are you pro-Constitution, Kai?
Absolutely. I think, the constitutional values, that we're defending, I think are core, right? The basic promise of democracy, and that we, should have an equal voice, regardless of wealth, regardless of race, regardless of the circumstances of our birth, right? That we are created equal, and that we should have a government, right, in which we all have an equal voice. I think that is fundamental to, what our country is, and the seed of that was planted by our Constitution. Wasn't, the Constitution had some real problems at the beginning, 3/5 of a person, right? But through generations of struggle, right, we've taken that promise of democracy and stretched it and expanded it and continue to try to realize it. And this is the fundamental democratic struggle of our time, is going to be the question of whether we're going to have a democracy in which people have power as voters and as citizens, or just moneyed interests, the billionaires and the corporations, are able to subvert all the work that we've done to bring people into the circle of those who can vote by going around that and creating a wealth primary that selects candidates who are only going to be responsive to the needs and the whims of the 1% instead of those of the people. And so I think what we're doing is carrying forward that struggle to realize the promise of democracy that was seeded in our Constitution, and through amendments over time, we have struggled to realize. And now we need another amendment. Almost every generation has amended the Constitution. Now we have to be prepared to do so again in order to overturn Citizens United, McCutcheon, Buckley versus Vallejo, these other decisions that have enshrined a system in which corporations and billionaires have a supposed right to spend unlimited amounts of money to influence and control our elections, which is a corruption of our system and a violation of political equality. And we as the people, through our representatives in Congress and legislatures, need to be able to create regulations to ensure that we have free and fair elections that are not corrupt and have a government that's responsive to all. That's a question of equal representation and fundamental equality that's guaranteed, we believe, through our Constitution and our values as a nation.
I would definitely say it's more of a corporatocracy right now. The corporations have the majority of the control. They fund the politicians, and the politicians write into law what takes place. So if there's a way that you can actually let me ask you this. Do you vote?
Absolutely.
Who are you going to vote for the presidential election?
Personally, I support Bernie Sanders, but as a campaign, Democracy Spring is nonpartisan. We have people that support Bernie, many folks that support Hillary, people that support Trump are welcome, right? We're a nonpartisan campaign that's united by our demand for Congress to take action to save our democracy, to end corruption, ensure we have free and fair elections that give us an equal voice. And anyone who's willing to work together in a spirit of inclusion and respect is welcome in this movement, right? And we're bound together by those principles of unity that include a commitment to nonviolence, right? So it's a nonpartisan campaign that's bigger than any candidate or any election, and is fighting to win a democracy that represents us all, that's based on one person, one vote, and a government that will be a tool to solve our problems and realize this vision of liberty and justice for all that's at the heart of the promise of our country. So that's what I'm focused on right now. That's what we're focused on right now, is building a movement that's going to win that change. No matter who's elected, if you're a Bernie supporter, Bernie will tell you himself, he can't do it alone, right? The changes that his supporters want to see. That there needs to be a movement to create this political revolution, right? If you're a Clinton supporter, same thing. You got to recognize that the changes that we need are not going to be won just by any president. And if you're a Trump supporter, God bless you. You got to know the same thing, that that change is not going to be delivered by any president. And I hope that you will turn away and make it clear that presidential candidates in our country should not get away with saying these kinds of things, like we're going to deport tens of millions, 10, 11 million people that are part of the fabric of our country, undocumented immigrants, aspiring citizens, that we're going to bar 1.8 billion members of the human family, Muslims, from coming into our country, et cetera, et cetera. That has no place in our politics. We need to rise above that and bring people together into a movement that's going to force change, a movement that's going to win systemic reforms, so that whoever is elected for president and whoever is elected in Congress are elected in the context where people are standing up and demanding that people running for office at any level make a clear decision to stand with the people on the side of democracy, not on the side of big money and corruption. That's what's going to create the mandate for reform, that our movement can then grow and continue to organize and continue to mobilize and do something even bigger than Democracy Spring to force them to honor that mandate and pass reforms that will end this corruption and give us a government that is truly up by and for the people.
Have you seen the series House of Cards?
I haven't
Okay.
watched anything from the new season, so please don't give me any spoilers. I'm
I
gonna have to wait till the end of the campaign. End of the campaign.
Well, I'm
But
not
I tell
going to
you,
give
when I
you.
do watch it, it always motivates me. It says, these are the people we got to beat. We got to have a movement that's based in truth and love, and that's fighting for democracy, and that brings people together and brings our better angels. Which, when we step up and we're willing to use our power as everyday people, we're able to change things. And that's what we're building here in Democracy Spring, is something that can overcome the Frank Underwoods of the world. And more
I love it, man.
when change is right,
I love
we
it.
have a system. We have a system that does not reward that, right? A system that enables people to run and to really represent everyone in their community, and to seek, in which the best ideas and the broadest popular support, broadest support from the public, from voters, are what matter, not who has the most backing from moneyed interests, and who can prevent supporters of their opponents from being able to vote, right, and keep people from participating in our democracy. That is not democracy. That's a plutocracy. That's oligarchy, corporatocracy, as you said. That's what we're going to change in Democracy Spring. That's what we call on people to participate in. Go to democracyspring.org, sign up to be part of this moment. We're going to change the weather in this country. We're going to rock this election. We're going to shake the foundations of this corrupt status quo and open the way to spring a new day for our democracy in our country.
Well, what I like about what you just said, Kai, basically is, whoever gets in office, that's fine. You guys are going to change the way things are behind the scenes. So whoever gets put in there, they're going to be a part of that change, and I can certainly appreciate that. And the reason I brought up House of Cards is because in the series, as bad and evil as Kevin Spacey is, he plays that part so good. It's almost like it's tough not to root for him, even though he's doing the wrong things and stuff. I mean, Dunbar, she was definitely the one that seemed to have the right mindset, at least going into it, and then she kind of changed a little bit. But regardless, I'm digressing. So he kind of seems, and the politicians in that series kind of seem to be so narcissistic that as long as their campaign's going good, they'll do whatever it takes. If it's start a war, if it's create a bill or pass a law or make fuel prices cheaper, they'll do whatever it takes. So I guess if you guys could essentially make it that powerful and that important with this movement to where the people that are in power have to make a change because it is going to affect their political campaigns, then that's the key to the kingdom.
That's the key to any change, my brother. We have to recognize that as everyday people, we actually do have the power, because the system, the status quo, the institutions of our society can only function, can only continue with the consent and cooperation of all of us, right? We are what make it possible for the trains to run on time in our society, right? For things to move forward, for commerce to happen, right? For every institution to function. And we give power to those in positions of authority by consenting and cooperating, right? And so what movements can do is inspire people and empower people to understand, we can take that power back by choosing to no longer consent and cooperate with the status quo, right? And that can force it to change, right? When workers go on strike within a company, they can grind everything to a halt until their demands are met. Doesn't mean that it's easy, but we have the power if we're willing to give up our fear and to feel our power and to connect with hope and the love that we have for ourselves and the people in our country and our communities, our families that need change, right? And that's what Democracy Spring is about us coming together and saying that this corrupt status quo can only continue if people do not stand up and challenge it in a way that exposes it and forces people to take a stand around it and makes those who want to continue it have to do so against resistance that's persistent and nonviolent by people. If members of Congress have to continue sending people to jail day after day, and then again, if we continue to do this, right, and it grows around the country, in order to maintain the status quo, it will end because people will be mobilized across our country to stand up, and our elections will be framed within this question of where you stand on the side of democracy and the people are big money and corruption. Are you willing to fight to pass the reforms, the solutions that are on the table right now that can fix this, that can change the way that our elections are funded, so it's based on all the people and not just the 1%, and that can ensure that everyone has the ability to exercise their right to vote and participate. If we can do that, we can build this moment. We can create this build this movement and create this moment. I believe that we can open the possibility to a future that can enable everyone in our country to pursue and to fulfill their dreams.
Also the name that you picked, Democracy Spring, I think of Arab Spring is what comes to mind. Why did you pick that specific?
The time of year that we were planning the action, and that we wanted to tap into that the power of spring, which is the change, right? Is life coming back, is things blooming again, right? And so, after generations of struggle to realize the promise of democracy in our country, we've been in a time of really retrenchment where things have been going backwards. And despite all that work to bring people into the circle of those who can vote, this effort to create a wealth primary that cuts us out from having power and to begin to disenfranchise and prevent people from being able to exercise that right to vote. So that was so hard fought and won. And so we wanted to confront that in a way that was big enough and bold enough and to say, we're going to stand in the way of this, okay, and break open the space for something new to be born, for something new to bloom, right, which is a resurgence and a renewal of democracy and a fulfillment of taking it to the next stage, right? And that, I believe, is where we're going to start this April in Washington, D.C. And I call on anyone who agrees with us and wants to see this change, to be willing to step up and be part of it. I guarantee you're not going to regret it. It's tremendously empowering to be part of a movement and to feel your own power to create change. And that's the experience that we're all going to have together. And we will force a reckoning around this issue in our country and open the door to change. We will focus attention on this question like never before. And I believe that we're going to make this a burning issue within the election, and that we're going to elevate those who stand on the right side and be able to win that and create a mandate for reform that our movement will continue to grow and push to enforce in 2017. There's tremendous possibility for change if we step up and seize the opportunity of this moment, make this the largest civil disobedience of this century, make it something that no one can ignore.
Have you guys had the opportunity to speak with any lawyers? Has anybody reached out to you saying, hey, if something happens, we want to defend you for free? Or
we have a lawyer who's on the short list of folks who are most familiar with these kind of actions in D.C., Brother Mark Goldstone. And he's leading a team of volunteer attorneys that will represent everyone who participates in these actions. And we're very confident about the level of support that we can provide to make sure that everyone knows what they're getting into and is supported and comes out of it in a strong position, feeling great about their experience.
And one last question I'd like to ask you before we close out tonight, and
Sure.
I appreciate you letting me pick your brain.
My pleasure.
So with what you said about giving basically everybody a right to come into the country, there are a lot of non-vetted people that are coming into the country right now. And I'm all for land of the free and liberty, and that's how America was basically founded, is by people coming from other countries that wanted a better life, and I can completely appreciate that. And I also want to add, let's look at a lot of the people that are going to be coming into America and other Western countries from Syria and other war-torn places, but a lot of them seem to be fitting the description of, military combatants. And I can completely understand people wanting to have a good life. However, do you think that it's important for national security and for your friends and family to have some type of vetting process where if people are coming in from places like that, where they basically, a lot of them hate Western culture, they're going to make sure that they're not going to do something like what happened in Brussels recently?
Well, look, I think that we have processes of vetting that are in place, right? And taking sensible measures is important. But I think we have to be really clear that America is a generous nation, right? And we need to welcome people, especially coming from situations of great hardship. That's what makes us strong, right? And I think those are the same values that bring us together in this campaign, is that we want to bring people together, right, to stand together and to have a government that represents us all, in which all of our needs count, and which is a way to ensure liberty and justice for all. It gives us an opportunity to really solve the problems that we face as a country, whether they're those of national security, questions of war and peace, questions of economic inequality, mass incarceration, dealing with climate change. All of these have to be dealt with through our government. All of these have to be dealt with through our democracy. And if it's not one that serves all of the people, then we're not going to be able to solve those problems. And that's what we're fighting to change here in Democracy Spring.
And I can certainly tell you're passionate with your beliefs, and that's what's most important. You believe in what you're doing, and if these things can really take hold and these little changes can turn into big changes, hopefully you can create a better opportunity for our future generations, and we can have a new renaissance, man, and that would be absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
Folks,
I hear you, brother.
Yeah, and thanks again.
That's what we're going to do.
Wonderful, wonderful. And thanks again for coming on the show. I'm certainly looking forward to seeing these live streams. I'm going to set up a designated channel specifically for you guys. If you want to send me live streams on there, people can have access to that 24 hours a day.
Yes, sir. We'll make that happen.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it, brother. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.